All right, welcome everyone from North Carolina and around the nation. We're honored that you've chosen to spend the next 2 hours with us. My name is Christy Norris. I'm the director of one of tonight's hosting organizations, Carolina K-12 at UNC Chapel Hill. And I first want to say that we at Carolina K-12 know you're facing as teachers just incredible challenges always, and especially right now. And so we want you to know that we genuinely respect and value and appreciate the critical work that each of you are doing. So in addition to saying thank you for being here, we want to say thank you for your service in the classroom. So I want to just take a moment to share what our hopes and goals are for this session, a lot of which has been based, frankly, on the feedback that each of you gave when registering and sharing what your specific challenges are in the classroom. So I'm going to spend a few minutes telling you here about the two organizational hosts for this program. And then after that, we'll dive in with the amazing Dr. Sonny Kelly. I know you're going to love his presentation. And don't worry, there is PowerPoint up right now, but I'm not going to staff meeting you to death with 50 PowerPoint slides. Tonight is not about PowerPoint, so rest assured. So why are we here? First, we at Carolina K-12 are adamant that teachers need and deserve time to think as scholars, to reflect as professional practitioners. And as former teachers, we know it's often hard to feel like a scholar sometimes as a K-12 teacher, particularly with the deprofessionalization of the K-12 space that I know so many of you are feeling. But you are scholars and experts and valued professionals, and we want you to have a quality space to reconnect with that side of yourselves. Tonight, we'll be exploring a less considered perspective on the Boston Massacre with Dr. Sonny Kelly. Let me just amplify that expectation again. We will not be covering the whole story of the American Revolution and the founding of America. You've read those stories a million times. Those stories are in every single textbook on your classroom shelf, probably, and we only have 2 hours. So we are here tonight to elevate a less known perspective as we look at the shooting of Crispus Attucks. We are here to ask questions, to complicate the traditional narrative. And as we do this, we ask that you as learners, as practitioners yourselves, really lean into it. If you hear something that's new and maybe it unsettles you, or you don't like it, you disagree, you feel uncomfortable, rather than retreat, when you feel that kind of feeling, really lean in and listen a little bit closer. As teachers, that's part of what we want to have our students in the classrooms do. And also, we want to have you really ask yourselves, similar to what we asked ourselves to host this program tonight, whose stories am I elevating in the lessons I choose to teach? Whose stories are being left out? Whose voices are silent? So Dr. Kelly is going to offer some thoughts about this history for around 30 minutes or so. He's going to do a performance excerpt from his amazing one-man piece called The Talk. And then the rest of our time together is going to be to consider ideas, specific strategies for how to teach hard history, for how to do this work. And also we're going to spend some time reconsidering why it's so crucial to do this work, even given the risks that we know many of you feel in very palpable ways right now. This work is important now as more and as much as ever as it has been. Again, because we only have 2 hours together, and as teachers, we all know our biggest enemy is time. We will be sending out follow-up resources, lesson plans, and professional development opportunities from Carolina K-12 and the Museum of History to immediately support you in this work beyond tonight. We also hope that you'll leave committed to furthering your knowledge and your own pedagogy with the understanding that this work is a marathon and not a sprint. We know this work is difficult and challenging, and we also know that this work is critical to our democracy and, frankly, to our survival. A real quick note about logistics. We had over 300 folks register More people are still coming in from the weight room. Welcome. So to help us manage a group of this size, to keep the space safe and productive for each of you, we're going to keep everyone on mute with the cameras off. So if you didn't take your shower today, you're good. The Q&A feature is open, however. So please reach out, ask a question throughout this program. Crystal Reagan, who you're going to meet in just a bit from the Museum of History, will be behind the scenes in the chat box with you. We'll bring some of those questions to the forefront tonight. And then, of course, you have amazing questions that many of you posed in your registration form, which I'll be putting to the panel tonight. For your protection, when I pose those questions, I'm just going to use first names and maybe the district you teach in. Sometimes maybe not even that, because we know some of these questions deal with sensitive issues, and our main goal is to protect you. We have your back. And so after Dr. Kelly's talk, the rest of the time is dedicated to what you all said you want and you need as teachers, including how do we actually do this work in our classrooms without getting fired. We don't want to get anybody fired. Super quick about Carolina K-12, with whom I work. We're a program at UNC Chapel Hill. As I said, we are dedicated to supporting teachers with free, high quality professional development and curriculum. We'll share a link to our database of lesson plans and the follow-up to resources after this. Our Teaching Hard History initiative promotes what we think is the essential idea that teachers must learn and openly discuss and responsibly teach about our nation's shared hard history. This is how we ensure students can understand the implications of our past, the direct connections to our present, and that our students are empowered to address the challenges of the future. So we hope you will all continue to join us for both virtual and hopefully one day in-person programming again. I want to invite Ms. Crystal Reagan on for just a minute, who is the new education section chief for our partner host tonight, the North Carolina Museum of History. Like me, Crystal is a former classroom teacher. She's also a former school administrator and a history enthusiast. And she's going to just provide a very quick welcome from the museum before we get started tonight. So Crystal, are you here with us?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Christy, for that warm welcome and for the opportunity to just introduce myself and share a few highlights regarding the awesome programming that we offer at the North Carolina Museum of History. Again, as Christy said, I'm the new Chief Education Officer for the Museum of History. I'm originally from Goldsboro, North Carolina, so I'm from down east. And I'm a proud HBCU grad. I had to take a few seconds just to say that. So I want to give a shout out to any Aggies that might be in the audience. I have teaching experience at the middle school, high school levels, and a little bit at the collegiate level. And I've spent several years as a high school assistant principal. Again, I am a North Carolina history fan. I've taught North Carolina history, early American history, as well as African American history. And I also serve on the executive board for the North Carolina Council for the Social Studies. So after that introduction, I just wanted you to know a little bit about me. I want to spend just a minute to talk about some of the resources that we offer at the North Carolina History Museum. First, we have an African Americans in North Carolina Educator notebook, which covers the legacy and the contributions of African Americans in our state from the colonial period to present day times. And so it's a wealth of knowledge covering and connecting to the standards. We have it in print form as well as an electronic form. We also have a North Carolina Women Making History Educator notebook. It's our newest educator notebook, and it contains standalone units, and it's also aligned with our standard course of study. I also invite you to take a look at our videos on demand, our interactive exhibit features on two major exhibits. And those are Women Making History and the African American Life and Culture feature of our huge exhibit called The Story of North Carolina. Please write down this web address, beyondtheexhibits.com, beyondtheexhibits.com, where you can find those notebooks in print and electronic form. Those are just a few of the items that we offer that I think would be of great use to all of our teachers within the state and across the nation. And so again, I'm elated to join you this afternoon, along with my colleague from the museum, Ms. Jessica Pratt, for what I fully expect to be an enlightening session of sharing and learning. We are glad to partner with K-12 Humanities, and we're in the process of adding new materials for teachers, students, and parents. considering this COVID-19 distant remote learning period that we're in. We are working to make changes and improvements to make content more user-friendly and accessible. So stay tuned and check in often. I look forward to building partnerships with all of you as the museum continues to try to find innovative ways to reach our state. So thank you, connect with us and reach out, and I'm back to you, Christy.
Thank you, Crystal. And remember, Crystal's going to be working behind the scenes in the Q&A box there if you have any questions and didn't catch any of those sites. And again, we'll be sending those out to you. The other thing I really want to do is say thank you to the Breitmeyer Foundation for providing the funding for this virtual series of Teaching Hard History events. We're very appreciative to them for supporting this work. And now on to our event, on to why we are here together this evening. As we move into our program's content, I wanted to share a quote here that I think has been particularly relevant to so much of our recent current events and is also very relevant to the subject matter this afternoon. Historian David Blight said that past and present are always connected in any people's history. They flow into one another, often in unseen ways, but often in moments of shock and recognition. When it comes to issues of race and the legacies of slavery in America, we are frequently reminded of these truths. So as we learn from one another over this next hour or so, I want you to really pay attention to those connections, to think about the ways you see this happening in today's world as we learn about similarities back in the world of the 1700s. On March 5th, 1770, a little after 9 p.m., men in uniform shot and killed 5 unarmed men, one of whom was a man of African indigenous descent who had escaped enslavement. His name was Crispus Attucks, and the soldiers were tried and largely went unpunished in any serious way. Now, this might seem like a rather nuanced way to describe what became known as the Boston Massacre, but the trial of those British soldiers in 1770 can prompt some serious reflection today on where we've been and where we currently are on certain issues that are really older than the Republic itself. So with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Sonny Kelly, who is an acclaimed performance artist, writer, and director of just incredible live theater, including his one-man show called The Talk, which dramatizes the difficult conversation he had with his own son about race and specifically racial violence in America after the 2015 murder of Freddie Gray. Since then, Dr. Kelly has been very busy. He's created the Talking the Talk workshop, which leads audiences through critical conversation and the performance process to consider their own sense of self, community, and agency. And he's also created a follow-up with Walking the Talk, where Dr. Kelly works collaboratively through facilitated open dialogue to develop courses of action, ultimately for more equitable, inclusive, and loving communities. So we can get you a lot of information about those workshops after this event, because I think he's really just brilliant in this work. He holds a PhD in Communication and Performance Studies from UNC Chapel Hill, and he is an absolute pleasure to be around. You should know he adores and respects K-12 teachers more than I could tell you. And so I want to turn it over to the amazing, the incredible Dr. Sonny Kelly. Thank you so much for being with us.
I'm so glad to be here. No place I'd rather be. Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Crystal, for your hospitality and for this opportunity. Thank you, all of you educators. We're here for you. You are the experts. You are the people of the hour. So for the next 30 minutes, I'm going to share with you an artful interpretation of the history as well as the lived experience that have kind of collided in my life to help me understand how history in many ways repeats itself and how we can be empowered to alter that repetition, to cause a break, to change the rhythm and the flow. So I love rhythm and flow. I like to start with poetry. There's a poem that's one of my favorites written by James Patrick Kinney back in the 1960s. It goes like this. 6 humans trapped by happenstance in bleak and bitter cold. Each possessed a stick of wood, or so the story's told. The fire dying in need of logs, the first one held his back, for of the faces round the fire, he noticed one was black. The next man looking across the way saw one not from his church and couldn't bring himself to give the fire his stick of birch. The poor man sat and tatted clothes and gave his coat a hitch. Why should his log be put to use to warm the idle rich? The rich man sat back and thought of all the wealth he had in store, and how to keep what he had earned from the lazy, shiftless poor. The black man's face bespoke revenge as the fire passed from his sight. See, all he saw in his stick of wood was a chance to spite the white. The next man of this forlorn group gave not except for gain. Giving only to those who gave was how he played the game. In death's still hands, each held his log as proof of human sin. They didn't die from the cold without. They died from the cold within. So each of us comes here today to this juncture with a stick, your skills, your training, your personal experience, your expertise. And we have a choice to put that stick into a fire that will burn bright and educate our children, warm them, make them feel courageous and strong and equipped for the world, or to hold it back because we're so busy being politically correct or careful or offended, whatever the case may be. So I want to ask you today, just present your stick as I'm presenting mine in the best way that I can, and let's see if we can make a fire out of it together. So let's go back into this history lesson into 1770. I'd like to share a story with you. It began somewhere around the fall of 1993, actually. So I'm sitting in this AP US history classroom, and my favorite teacher of all time, Mr. Rohn, is teaching about the American Revolution. He pauses to ask a question that none of us really knows the answer to. Who was the first American to die in the American Revolution? Some of my more ambitious classmates volunteered the usual suspect. Paul Revere, Sam Adams, Patrick Henry. Encouraged by our engagement with this intriguing trivia question, Mr. Rohn snuck me a kind of secret wink just before he declared, Crispus Attucks, Monday, March 5th, 1770, the Boston Massacre. I flipped through my history book and caught sight of artist Henry Pelham's color lithograph of the event. There, right smack in the middle of America's first revolutionary movement, were listed the names of 5 martyrs, courageous men confronting British tyranny: Samuel Maverick, James Caldwin, Samuel Gray, Patrick Carr, and a mulatto man named Crispus Attucks. A man who looked more like me than any other great American figure I had learned of in colonial history. Crispus Attucks. Suddenly, I could feel my chest swelling, you know? I mean, this wasn't even Black History Month, right? So bonus for me, right? Well, as the only student of visible African descent in that classroom, I am forever grateful to Mr. Rohn, who incidentally was a middle-aged conservative white man, for sharing this empowering and triumphant view of Crispus Attucks with me. His teaching confirmed for me the fact that the first 250 years of the history of my American ancestors in America could not simply be summed up with one simple word: slavery. Later, I would come to learn that the lithograph from our textbook was actually produced in 1856, and it served as a propaganda for the growing abolitionist movement. Similarly, the bronze relief plaque on the Boston Massacre monument that was erected in Boston Common in 1888 bears a clear depiction of Crispus Attucks as a man of African descent. This was meant to celebrate the heroism of Crispus Attucks and the dignity of Black Americans. However, I also learned that the first prominent depiction of the Boston Massacre was Paul Revere's version that was originally circulated back in the 1770s, and it depicted only white people. This taught me that in this great land that seems to aspire for colorblindness, Blackness has always mattered to one extent or another. It appears that it mattered enough to Paul Revere to produce a glaring omission of Attucks' African-looking body in his rendition of the Boston Massacre. It mattered enough to the creators of the 1856 and the 1888 depictions that they featured clearly African Crispus Attucks prominently in the foreground of their art. And over 100 years after that, to a high school kid who'd never seen his ancestors portrayed as anything but slaves in antebellum American history, Attucks' Blackness it certainly mattered to me. See, the story of America's contention with Blackness began long before that crisp spring evening in Boston back in 1770. To get to the heart of the matter, we've got to put all of our sticks of wood together and return to our family tree. Yeah, yours and mine. This family tree holds our history, and it has been here for longer than any of us can remember. And it will continue to grow for as long as, well, as long as we can imagine, I guess. I must warn you, it is a haunted tree. It is full of saints and haints, specters and spooks, and inconvenient truths. Constitutionalists, Confederates, captives and captors, Union soldiers, euphemistically euthanized natives, and Irish scrappers. They are all right here with you and me, coursing through our veins. Can you feel them? In the words of the great American poet Paul Laurence Dunbar, they have shared your nightly toils. They have shared your nightly vigil. They have shared your nightly toil, and their blood with yours commingling has enriched the southern soil. Can you feel them? I can feel them running through my natural born veins, just running. Running so fast and so hard, I feel like my blood could boil sometimes. To help me tell Crispus' story today, I have brought our ancestors along. My white grandpaps who boldly stood up against British tyranny and northern aggression, who poured tea in the sea and secretly forced their bodily affection on my Black and Native grandmas. My African, European, and indigenous American ancestors who were killing, oppressing, and enslaving each other long before their destinies ever collided with one another. I am the embodiment of our forefathers' commitment to these self-evident truths that all men are created equal. Only they didn't mean all men at the time, or any women before the amended sequels. Once alienated from my unalienable rights, here I stand, a product of my ancestors' survival of sundry plights. From indentured servitude to British tyranny, from chattel slavery to the Trail of Tears, you see, they live in me. Like Sister Maya Angelou said, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. We are. Y'all, we are the dream and the hopes of our ancestors, yours and mine, ours. See, before all of the labeling and categorizing, we all, every one of us, started with mutual ancestors somewhere in Africa. Yeah, that's where we all find our common roots. So as funny as it may sound, and as hard as it may be to see, if you look back far enough, every one of us came from the same family tree, the same haunted tree. Some of us, like Crispus and me, just happen to be a little darker than others. In other words, the great William Shakespeare once said, "Aye, there's the rub." Now, whether he likes it or not, and regardless of his skin tone, the child who is identified as Black in this country has been born with a congenital condition that Harvey Young refers to as the misrecognition of his individuated body, whereby the existing fears, prejudices, hatreds felt toward Black bodies are inevitably and continually projected onto his fragile frame. And there's nothing he can do about it. You can change your neighborhood, your profession, your social status, your religion, even your name if you like. The Bible even speaks about the wonder working power of Jesus Christ. Behold, old things have passed away and all things have become new. But I ain't never met a Black man who could stop being Black. British philosopher Paul Gilroy says that race is merely a construct of racism. What he means is that in the Western colonial world, in order for white to be right, Black had to lack. In order for whiteness to be constructed as the pure and good master race, Blackness had to be deconstructed from mere physical features and reconstructed into an essentially base and evil threat. Such was the creation of the Black man in America. It's what Franz Fanon refers to as the epidermalization of a people, and what the rapper Ice Cube means when he says, "My skin is my sin." Well, to be honest, This confusing concoction of colorized categorization began long before what you and I now call America even existed. During the mid-15th century, European explorers led by the Portuguese crown began to discover, explore, and conquer parts of Africa. Their goals were to produce riches, procure riches, discover new trade routes, and to spread Christianity throughout the world. As their affluence and influence expanded, they developed a new goal: to find cheap labor. Many hands make light the work when we're building a global empire. At this time, Prince Henry of Portugal sponsored numerous Atlantic voyages from Europe to West Africa to bypass the already very successful Islamic slave trade of its time. In doing so, he created a different sort of slavery, one that the world had never seen before. And it was based upon his powerfully ingenious new concept called o negro, the black. Up until his death in 1460, Prince Henry had it all written down on paper, a kind of a blueprint for blackness. Back in 1453, Prince Henry's first biographer, Gomez Eanes Asurada, wrote the Chronicle of the Discovery and Conquest of Guinea to express the findings of some of Portugal's greatest explorers into the deepest, darkest reaches of Africa. In doing so, Asurada became what Ibram X. Kendi describes as the first maker and crafter of race. Asurada took all of the diversity of the African diaspora and bundled it all up, all of its continents of indigenous people groups, under the umbrella of negro, black. In doing so, he effectively created a race. He wrote, very early in the morning, by reason of the heat, the seamen began to make ready their boats and to take out those captives and carry them on shore as they were commanded. As these placed all together in the field were a marvelous sight. For amongst them were some white enough, fair to look upon and well proportioned. Others were less white, like mulattoes. Others, again, were as black as Ethiops and so ugly, both in features and in body. See, for Asurada, blackness was deeper than skin tone. It was a condition of the soul as well. Before they had lived in perdition of soul and body, of souls in that they were yet pagans without the clearness of the light of the holy faith, and of their bodies in that they lived like beasts without any custom of reasonable beings. For they had no knowledge of the bread or wine, and they were without the covering of clothes or the lodgment of houses, and worse than all, through the great ignorance that was in them, in that they had no understanding of good, but only knew how to live a bestial sloth. Asurada, Prince Henry, and most European explorers, colonizers, and enslavers were deeply devout Christians. This begs the question, how does a Christian world justify the enslavement and torture of a whole group of humans? Well, they use the hand of God to strip them of their humanity. Most of Asurada's writings describe slave taking and trading as a means of spreading Christianity to the heathen people of Africa. In the book of Genesis, chapter 9, verse 24 in the Bible, after the great flood, Noah, the builder of the great ark, curses Canaan, the child of his youngest son, Ham. Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants, he shall be to his brethren. Who are the cursed descendants of Canaan? Well, in 1578, English traveler, writer George Best provided an answer to that. It is God's will that Ham's son and all his posterity after him should be as black and loathsome that it might remain a spectacle of disobedience to all the world. This allusion was so pervasive that whole Christian denominations condoned the enslavement of black people, the sons of Ham, as an act of biblical obedience throughout the 19th century and beyond. In fact, because of this same belief, the American-born church known as the Church of Latter-day Saints would not allow blacks to hold leadership positions until 1978. Fast forward to that famous year, 1619, right? We're all trying to figure out how we're going to teach that, right? Well, in late August, a ship called the White Lion, an English privateer commanded by John Jope, sailed into Point Comfort and dropped anchor in the James River. near the Jamestown colony in Virginia, a year before the Pilgrims even landed at Plymouth in Massachusetts. Virginia colonist John Rolfe of Pocahontas fame recorded that there were 20-odd Africans on board, most, if not all of whom, were recorded as indentured servants. All of this takes a turn for the worst in 1640, when a man named John Punch, an African indentured servant, runs away from his master, a man named Hugh Gwynn in Virginia, with 2 other indentured servants, a Dutchman named Victor and a Scotsman named James Gregory. So John must have been like talking to his friends Victor and James. He was like, oh, I hate this life. I hate being an indentured servant. Hugh Gwynn is like the worst master ever. I'm out of here. And then Victor was probably like, me too. It never gets this hot in Holland. It's way too hot for them to work us this hard. Let's take our chances in the wilderness. Then James was probably like, look, fellas, I can hardly understand what you're saying with your strange accents over there. What? I'm with you, boys. A Scotsman is born with a free spirit that must be unleashed. Let's run away together. So they ran away together. And they worked together to come up with this foolproof plan, right? To sneak off from their master's estate into the frontier and start a new life of freedom. Except for the fact that their master came looking for them. Yeah, Hugh Gwynn finds them hiding out in the colony of Maryland. He and his posse recapture John, Victor, and James and bring them back to Virginia for a trial. The Council and General Court of Colonial Virginia strategically distinguishes between the European and the American fugitives. Order up, order up! Whereas Hugh Gwynn hath by order from the board brought back from Maryland 3 servants formerly run away from the said Gwynn, the court doth therefore order that the said 3 servants shall receive the punishment of whipping, to have 30 stripes apiece, one called Victor, a Dutchman, the other a Scotchman named James Gregory, shall first serve out their times with their master according to their indentures, and 1 whole year apiece after the time of their service is expired, by their said indentures in recompense of his loss sustained by their absence, and after their service to their said master is expired, to serve the colony for 3 whole years apiece. And that the third, being a Negro, named John Punch, shall serve his said master or his assigns for the time of his natural life, here or elsewhere. Y'all, this is the first mention of perpetual slavery in the American colonies. And its inception, it is inextricably bound to Blackness. Then in 1676, Bacon's rebellion rose as a populist rebellion under the wealthy landowner Nathaniel Bacon. Bacon took offense at some of the policies of Virginia Governor William Berkeley. So Bacon musters this band of rebels to attack the colonial government. This man, y'all, was able to organize a militia of 300 to 500 men against the colony of Virginia. This was a ragtag army of mostly poor people. I'm talking white frontiersmen, Black slaves, indentured servants, and Native Americans. I don't know why we act like we just invented the concept of diversity and inclusion in the 20th century. Bacon was doing it way back then. This makeshift multicultural militia was so powerful that when they moved on Jamestown on Friday, September 19th, 1676, they overcame the colonial forces, burned down the colonial capital to the ground, and pushed the sitting government to the boats in the James River. After 2 more victories, this motley crew of mutineers was vanquished by British reinforcements assigned with putting down the rebellion. Soon thereafter, European settlers and indentured servants were given severe penalties for colluding with the Africans and Native Americans. They were offered prizes for capturing runaway Africans. The 1-drop rule became legislation, and any child with any African heritage whatsoever was automatically born into bondage. Servants of African descent were easily spotted and isolated on sight. This made their Blackness a convenient marker for a ready source of lifelong free labor. By the turn of the 18th century, the powers that be had effectively driven a wedge between poor whites and Blacks, and Blackness had become a mark for perpetual chattel slavery in the American colonies. So, fast forward to our story. Let's go to the year of our Lord, 1723, when Crispus Attucks was born to a Native American mother of the Wampanoag tribe and an enslaved black father somewhere around the province of Framingham, Massachusetts. Being a person of African descent, Crispus Attucks was born into slavery. Based upon an ad that slave owner William Brown placed in a newspaper in 1750, it appears that Crispus Attucks was 6 feet 2 inches tall, knock-kneed, and had short curly hair. Of note, the name Crispus is Latin for curly. A newly freed man in his late 20s, Crispus took to the high seas as a sailor. The life of the sailor was dangerous and very difficult, but it also offered a runaway slave cover from bounty hunters and slave traders. It makes sense that during that time of the American Revolution, black men made up approximately 1/5 of the 100,000 sailors in America. Crispus worked mostly on whaling ships, and when he wasn't at sea, he found himself working as a rope maker. On the night that he died, Crispus had just finished from a tour in the Bahamas and was on his way to North Carolina. The events that unfolded on that fateful Monday night on March 5th, 1770, have been reported and disputed from many different sources and perspectives. A few things that are consistent about all these reports are that the American sailors despised the British soldiers because they often competed with them for work, and the British were known to kidnap American soldiers and force them to serve in the Royal British Navy. So these notions of immigrants taking our jobs and engaging in human trafficking is not so new to us. We also know that a crowd of American colonists, including Crispus Attucks, started with harassing some of the British soldiers. So 8 soldiers gathered together to hold off the multitude. Surrounded by a crowd yelling and throwing everything from snowballs to pieces of coal to clamshells at them, 8 British soldiers confronted up to 400 angry colonists, yelling, "Lobsters, bloody bats, fire! Why don't you fire?" One witness claims that Crispus charged the soldiers as he shouted, "Kill them! Kill the dogs! Knock them over!" Captain Thomas Preston, the officer of the guard, attempted to control the situation. "Stand off! Stand off! I presume that none of you wants to die tonight." Then someone from the back of the mob threw a club that hit Private Montgomery, knocking him to the ground. "Damn you, fire!" someone shouted. It is said that Crispus Attucks actually grabbed one of the soldiers' musket by the bayonet. In the frenzy, one of the soldiers fired his musket, landing 2 bullets in Crispus Attucks' chest. Soon, most of the other soldiers were erratically firing into the mob, and as the men began to reload, Captain Preston ordered, "Stop firing! Stop firing!" When the smoke had cleared, 5 men lay dead or dying in the bloody snow. Most reports confirm that Crispus Attucks, with wooden club in hand, was one of the leaders of this riot. However, by the inhabitants of Boston, Crispus was not known as a rioter or even simply a black man. He was known to be a patriot and a hero. It is said that Samuel Adams himself organized a procession to transport Attucks' casket to Boston Faneuil Hall, where Crispus lay in state for 3 days before the victim's public funeral. Some historians have estimated that 10 to 12,000 people, that's more than half of Boston's population, joined in the procession that carried the caskets of Attucks and his 4 co-martyrs to the graveyard. Where Crispus Attucks' blackness creeps back into the story is in the trial of these 8 British soldiers. Their defense attorney was none other than John Adams, a prominent lawyer who would become the 2nd president of these United States. Adams' argument was that this mob of thugs and rioters gave the British soldiers no choice but to fire on them in self-defense. He focused on Crispus Attucks' blackness and Patrick Carr's Irish descent as proof of their ferocity and danger to others. Adams pointed a picture of Attucks and his motley band of brothers as a troop of terrorists, no less dangerous than Bacon's army was to Virginia's government back in 1667. In doing so, Adams drove a wedge between Attucks, Carr, and the sensible citizens of Boston. He argued that the true victims here were innocent, law-abiding, white, British-descended Bostonians. Attucks, with his myrmidons, comes round Jackson's corner and down to the party of the sentry box. When the soldiers pushed the people off, this man with his party cried, "Do not be afraid of them. They dare not fire. Kill them, knock them over. And he tried to knock their brains out. It is plain the soldiers did not leave their station, but cried to the people, stand off. Now, to have this reinforcement coming down under the command of a stout mulatto fellow whose very looks was enough to terrify any person. What had not the soldiers then to fear? He had hardiness enough to fall in upon them, and with one hand took hold of a bayonet, and with the other knocked the man down. This was the behavior of Attucks, to whose mad behavior, in all probability, the dreadful carnage of that night is chiefly to be ascribed. And it is in this manner this town has been treated. A car from Ireland and an Attucks from Birmingham, happening to be here, shall sally upon them their thoughtless enterprises, all the head of such a rabble of Negroes, etc., as they can collect together, and then there are not wanting persons to ascribe all their doings to the good people of this town. After deliberating for about 3 hours, the jurors found all of the soldiers innocent of murder, but they did judge Privates Montgomery and Kilroy guilty of manslaughter. Although these men were technically convicted of a capital offense, the court permitted them to have a special plea that reduced their penalty to branding on the thumb. Montgomery later admitted it was he who was the one who shouted, "Damn you, fire!" just before he shot his own musket. In spite of John Adams' effective weaponization of Crispus Attucks' blackness for the trial, Attucks was celebrated by colonial Americans in 1770 and beyond. Poet John Boyle O'Reilly said of Crispus, "He was the first to defy, the first to die." In 1888, a monument was built on Boston Common commemorating the death of the 5 men who died in the Boston Massacre. Today, Crispus Attucks continues to be honored by the American public. In fact, in 1998, to commemorate the 275th anniversary of his birth, the U.S. Mint issued a silver dollar coin in honor of Attucks. Many schools, children's centers, foundations, and museums today are named after him, representing the struggle and heroism of a Black man searching for freedom. All of this reminds me that as Americans, we are masters of selective amnesia. Take the Ahmad Arbury story, for example. On Sunday, February 23rd of this year, a 25-year-old Black man named Ahmad Arbury is jogging not far from his own home in a predominantly white neighborhood in Brunswick, Georgia called Santilla Shores. 2 white men, 64-year-old Gregory McKnight and his son, 34-year-old Travis McKnight, spot Ahmad's body running through the neighborhood. They read his blackness as a threat. Incidentally, the name Ahmad is Arabic for highly praised. Travis is Old English for crossroads or toll gate. Gregory is from the Latin gregorius, meaning watchful or alert. On this sunny Sunday afternoon, Gregory's watchful eye spies Ahmad's out-of-place blackness. In that neighborhood, on that road, Ahmad's blackness shrouds all that is praiseworthy about him. He will come to a crossroads where Travis will demand a heavy toll of him. Gregory is armed with a .357 Magnum pistol and Travis has a shotgun. They jump into their truck and Gregory calls 911. 911, what's the address of the emergency? I'm out here at Santilla Shores. There's a Black male running. Santilla, where at Santilla Shores? I don't know what street we're on. Stop right there. Damn it, stop, Travis! They attempt to make a citizen's arrest, but Ahmad is not cooperative. He tries to evade them, outrun them, but then he sees that Gregory, Travis, and their associates are not going to release him. Ahmad tries to fight his way out, defying the tyranny of his entrapment, perhaps with the same passion that Crispus felt when he defied the tyranny of the British soldiers in Boston. But this is not Boston, Massachusetts in 1770. It is Brunswick, Georgia in 2020. Instead of Crispus grabbing a soldier's bayonet and facing the muzzle flash of his musket with his own body, Ahmad grabs for Travis's shotgun and lets his fists fly. A fight ensues. Ahmad is shot, once in the hand, twice in the chest. Travis and Gregory go home safely that Sunday night on February 23rd and sleep in their own beds. According to police reports, the event was a simple act of citizen's arrest and self-defense. These two men were not arrested until nearly 3 months later on May 14th. They planned to plead not guilty. Like Crispus, Ahmad Arbery's name is now famous. He is celebrated by his family, local community, and some who attach his name to the Black Lives Matter movement. Others would prefer to forget that Ahmad Arbery killing ever happened. You see, the difference between Boston and Brunswick is that our definition of tyranny is, well, it's fluid, isn't it? As Americans, we all understand British occupation as tyranny, a persistent threat to our national existence. As Black Americans, only some of us understand racism as tyranny, a persistent threat to our bodily existence. Back in 1903, W.E.B. Du Bois wrote a book called The Souls of Black Folk, and in it, he expresses the experience of many Black Americans. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. You see, whether we like it or not, these two souls daily navigate a precarious collision course. And it's only a matter of time before they meet at the crossroads of black and man. A black man, black man, black man. You hear that? Let that sink in. Feel that. Feel what it does to you in your skin, in your guts, in your bones. A black man. My friends, whether we like it or not, that term is more loaded than all the 12-gauge shotguns, 357 Magnums, and 45 caliber pistols that the Black Panther Party brandished when they ascended the steps of the California State Capitol back in 1967, declaring their human rights before God and Governor Ronald Reagan himself. Come on, say it with me. I know you're on mute, just say it in spirit. Black man. I know we're in mixed company, everyone together. Black man. One more time together. Black man. Thank you. Now, I want you to take a moment and just think about what that term means to you. Now, if I'm being honest, that's a little unfair of me to ask you what the term black man means to you, when the truth is, we don't even really know, do we? I mean, it depends, doesn't it? The age of said black man, his size, his dress, his attitude, his profession, his political affiliation, his criminal record, not to mention the time of day in which you encounter said black man. Oh, and as the real estate agents have taught us, location, location, location. A theater, a Zoom call, a classroom, a city street, a back alley, a prison, a football field. This colonized, often brutalized and criminalized infrahuman, the black man in the Western world, has learned that his value, his meaning, his humanity, his very life may depend in any given moment upon a constellation of factors that far exceed his own reach. And my friends, with that, I would like to open up for discussion. And I will challenge us to step away from talking points, step away from trying to be careful, and let's just try to figure this thing out together, as I've been trying to figure out literally in my own body. Thank you for your audience. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Sonny. That was amazing. It's so amazing too, just to see performance woven in with historical facts. It's what our students are always seeking, right? To kind of tell those stories. So we have so many amazing questions, and I want to let everybody know that we're not possibly going to get to all of them. But one of our first questions is from Jennifer from Guilford, who wants to know how to make that connection, how you can make that connection more explicit between or about the Boston Massacre as an act of police brutality in the death of Crispus Attucks. So we know that the soldiers were tried. We know that they largely got off. What sources can we go to look at that? So for instance, I know the transcripts of this trial are very interesting. As you mentioned, John Adams is, verbatim, basically referencing the blackness, the largeness of Crispus Attucks. What do we go to? What are the sources? How do we make that connection and know that historically we're being accurate?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I think, I went to history.com and found a lot of information there. So that's the History Channel's website. A lot of information there, but I also crossed over to the Crispus Attucks Museum. So there's documentation there that's posted on the web, actual transcripts from the trial and other details about his lineage, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So that I could, this picture, as you can see right here, is this up right now? Oh, I
Yep.
love it. That's actually the ad that was put up in 1750 by Mr. Brown, Crispus Attucks' former owner.
Right.
And so these little pieces have been collected by this museum. So the museum it just had a robust kind of pool of information about Crispus Attucks and what happened there. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, history.com was helpful to me as well. Now, connecting it to police brutality today, I mean, the connection's pretty clear because the British were the police for them at that time, at least the most respected law enforcement officers there, because it was a British colony. But I think more importantly, you have to be careful to unravel and let it go where it goes, because the British soldiers were combining nationality, like mercantilism, allegiance to the crown, watching a burgeoning nation rise up. There were a lot of elements there. It wasn't just about race. Matter of fact, in this case, the fact that Crispus Attucks was black is a point of pride for us as Americans to know that we were actually more integrated in some ways, right? And that black people were actually allowed to, or actually there were spaces where black people stood up and stood up to injustice along with their white brothers and sisters. So this was not so much a racialized killing as much as it was a racialized trying afterward. So I think the stronger correlation is when you look at how white people tend to be tried for the same crimes as black people, and the disparity in sentencing rates, and the disparity in convictions as well.
Right. Yeah, I think that runaway ad that we just showed right there would be an amazing part of the lesson right there, just to have that conversation. I know when I taught history, I'd never seen that ads never included in a textbook, that part of the story. In fact, I don't know that it's very often that it's even acknowledged that he was in fact enslaved, and also the agency of him to escape slavery and to be back in Boston and working as a seaman on and off ships. That says a lot about, who this person was and what his skill set was. So in addition to that, and the transcripts, as we said, going back to those transcripts, I think is a great idea. And I know you also mentioned these images that I'm projecting right now. You talked a little bit about this, how even the difference of the way the story has been presented. That image on the right is the original Paul Revere piece of art, which you'll see. You might need to move Sonny and our head out of the way, but Mr. Attucks is not very dark-skinned looking in that original image when he was being, touted as a hero. It's not until actually the abolitionist movement on the left when you see this image that clearly portrays him as a darker-skinned man. So I think that's also an interesting conversation to have about, as you mentioned, how that narrative changes based on what we're seeking in the time.
Yeah, I think this notion of blackness mattering to different degrees is important, and selective amnesia.
Right.
And I don't say that to point fingers. I just say whatever's politically expedient at the time, it makes us feel better about ourselves as a nation, as individuals. It's the story we go with.
Right, that's right. So Bob from Durham asks a really interesting question. He says, as a history teacher, I'm always really cognizant of separating truth from fiction and making sure the whole story is accurate. So, that same day when Crispus was murdered, 4 unarmed white men were also killed. The soldiers certainly deserved representation in court. So why do you think it's important to also look at it from this side, from not really focusing on the traditional narrative? Why is this an important question to ask?
Well, I think that one thing that I've learned is that there is one absolute truth, sure, but I've never met a person who knew the absolute truth. Because whatever psychological issues we have, just our vantage point is always going to skew it a little bit. So I want to be careful. I don't want to fall into relativism here, but there is one truth. But that same truth is perceived by different people and different positionalities and standpoints. So that truth, which is a truth to you, Bob, is also a truth to me from a different perspective. Why does Crispus Attucks matter so much to me? I try to capture that spirit of that 15-year-old boy who just never seen himself, people that look like him represented there. I don't say that to play identity politics. Nobody had to tell me that I was black. I knew I was black because I live in a racialized country, and people tell me, oh, he's that black guy over there, right? My parents didn't have to indoctrinate me into anything. So this notion of me being black and how racialization is so prevalent in this country has always been a weight upon my body. But when I was studying about the origins of my nation, I never knew that a person like Crispus Attucks existed. So people like Carr and the other four gentlemen that died in that are also, patriots. And I say their names specifically because they do matter. I think just understanding the fact that outside of Carr's Irishness, the defense really hung on Crispus' blackness. And I will tell you this, Bob, to your point, if John Adams had not pressed into that blackness and weaponized it in such a way, as we see in the transcript, we wouldn't be having as much of a conversation now. I might just say, hey, it's so great to know that black people were involved in doing great stuff in colonial America. We hardly ever know it. Let's lift up these stories. But it's more than lifting up the story. That's one good thing, encouraging our students, right? And bring up diversity. But it's also lifting up racism in its most politically expedient, well-dressed, and official bodies and forms, right? There's no reason for John Adams to have accentuated the mulatto-ness and the list of the Negroes, if you weren't trying to drive a wedge. And I think that's a theme that we see here, that people in power have oftentimes driven wedges between people who have natural alliances, whether it's people of all different backgrounds during the Bacon Revolt, or in this case of the Boston Massacre. So these are 5 American patriots. I totally agree, Bob. John Adams put a fight onto the table when he said, this one black one, though, he's the cornerstone. He said he's the chief reason. He's the main guy. Now, could it have been because Crispus was a hothead, had a stick, and he was the main one out there? Maybe, but the fact that John Adams called out his race as part of that ferocity, that animalism, and then we can tie that back to the history of how we created blackness. We, the Western world, has created blackness as the animal, the less civilized, the certainly less Christian, less human. Right? Those things have stuck with us in some ways. So we've got to unravel them and talk about them.
I think that's such an interesting point too. One of the resources we'll share with everybody after this event is an article I know that you've read too, Dr. Kelly, which is Black Lives in the Boston Massacre. It's by Farrah Peterson. And one of the things that she talks about that's so interesting, as you said, there were so many different accounts of what happened that night. And she gets into the fact that in today's mind, we even forget about the darkness that this would have occurred in. While there would have been, old school lanterns, this was largely taking place in the dark. Now, she also talks about how the 1770 eye would have been more trained to see in this darkness. But I think even thinking about that and getting students to think about that is really fascinating, especially when you think about, how accurate can we say this history is? Is the story that we are telling the whole story, or is it just the piece of the story whoever was making the history book chose to elevate? So regardless of what's right and what's wrong, these are complex, interesting questions, I think, that have to be asked that students will certainly eat up too.
Yeah, and a shout out to that article because it speaks to how cross-curricular engagement is readily at hand. We're talking about biology and ophthalmology, right? The power of the eye to see better at night. We talk about Abraham Lincoln a lot and how he read by candlelight. Yeah. Considering the fact that their eyes could see better at night, like you said, considering the fact that it was a nighttime event. I kind of went back to the fact that they were throwing like hard objects. When you see rioters today throwing frozen water bottles, you see that. So there are some connections there. Like when people are trying to find something hard to stake their claim in because they have no other. They feel like they have no other recourse. But I think it's so important that we connect those things: biology, environment, history. one thing that I always say when you're teaching this kind of stuff, details are so important. So you'll notice I use people's names. I try to look up the meanings of their names. That's kind of an MO of what I do in my classrooms. I always learn my students' names first. And I ask my students, it's one of their first assignments, no matter what I'm teaching them, what is the meaning of your name? And what does it mean to you?
Yeah.
I think it's so, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And we've got to find the ways in which we can interweave ourselves into their lives and let them interweave into our lives. And then we don't have to worry so much about being so politically correct, because when you love somebody and they love you, they cut you slack.
Right.
I've learned that firsthand working with kids.
Yeah. I'm going to give you a really hard question, and I adore Olivia from Pitt County for asking this. She says, you know, folks are fascinated by this connection, a connection that, you know, I myself had never really thought of, you know, 1770 to 2020. So Olivia wants to know, what other parallels am I missing? You know, I never would have considered combining the Boston Massacre with 2020. Relatedly, John from Durham wants to know, what are some other ways to show the ongoing themes and connections throughout history? So off the top of your head, Dr. Kelly, do you have some thoughts of some other, you know, quick ways that teachers might want to do this? Because I think it's really when you bring history alive for your kids, this becomes history you can touch, right?
I will tell you, thank you for that question. It's a great question. I think that the Emmett Till story is very moving for most of us, because you think about this 14-year-old boy. But I think it's very useful for our students. Just like Anne Frank is so moving. You know, anybody seen the movie Freedom Riders or ever taught Anne Frank, right? Again, connecting literature to history. Just letting them know there are kids your age who went through some of this stuff, and it's amazing, and not teaching them in a way to put guilt or shame or fear on them, but to remind them of how resilient the human spirit can be, right? So I teach the Emmett Till story, and I perform it in my piece, The Talk, to kind of make a signpost to say, hey, this is a point in American history where racism was so voracious, so ruthless, that it took the life of a child with impunity, right? But also the notion of what bodies mean when you put them into the public sphere. I think that's really a great way to, you know, we talk about Bloom's taxonomy, right? To get to that place of analysis, like, okay, what did Emmett Till's body mean versus all those over 3,000 bodies, Black bodies that were lynched from the 1800s to the early 1900s in this country. So the Equal Justice Initiative has a wonderful breakdown on that. The Red Book, the Red Book website talks about some of the lynchings that have happened, right?
The Red Record.
What's it called?
The Red Record.
Red Record, thank you. I'm like, Red Book, Red Diary, Scarlet Letter, what? Okay, thank you.
It's from Ida B. Wells' work of the same name. It's Red Record. I'll ask Paul to put that up for folks to send them in.
So I will challenge you to look at the history of lynching, not to depress yourself, even though it can be depressing, but look at how we treat certain bodies, right? Mike Brown's body lie in the street there in Ferguson for many hours. You look at Ahmad Arbery, his body lie there for a little bit. There was actually some videotape. Travis McKnight's sister actually had placed a video of Ahmad Arbery's body in the street there until she realized it was not politically correct, and she pulled it down. She said that she was fascinated with forensics, and that's why she put it up. But this notion, and then of course we see George Floyd. Everybody knows George Floyd's face because we've seen his face pressed against the asphalt, right? In the same way, Black bodies were hanging from trees throughout the South mostly, and they were left there on purpose as a note. This is what Blackness means. Blackness and crime means death. Blackness and getting out of your social norms and being aspirational or ambitious means death. So it was a marker. Now it's different today. So again, we want our students to analyze, right? I think the fact that we see these videos and pictures of Black men being arrested, Black people being arrested and brutalized continues, but it's a different permutation, a different meaning. So just the same way that Crispus Attucks' meaning is fluid, so is the meaning of this Black body we're putting up. Now it's oftentimes used as a source of inspiration for protesters, right? For some people, it's also a bit of violent porn, right? Violence, people like to just watch this stuff, just see bodies dying. And nowadays, if you want to see people dying, the Black community is the place to go because we die at the highest rates. So I just think it's very interesting to analyze to kids. What does it mean when you see a dead Black body or a dying Black body or a brutalized Black body? It meant something back in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. It's starting to change and mean some other things now, but it still has some of those same vestiges and remnants of significance.
I want to ask you one more question, then I want to get to some specific teacher talk. But Diane Wright from Durham has asked a really great question. You know, it really feels like we are in a period of extreme reckoning right now in 2020. You know, it's palpable that we're living in this moment of history. I feel like all of us will be interviewed by children one day about 2020 in this time. So Diana's wondering, what happened? What forces came together to create this tipping point in 2020 for protests, for kind of, there's also kind of a historical reckoning happening with monuments being challenged and things like that. Why now, do you think?
You know, I think that because we are so politically polarized, that has translated into the appearance that we are racially polarized, but not as much, in my opinion, from my own personal experience, as the pundits and the media portray them. But it's but strife is sexy. There's a reason why when every time the president makes a gaffe or some kind of outlandish statement, the press is right there. It's like, he's been here since 2017. He's been saying this stuff all along. We're acting like it's brand new all the time, right? And I think the point is, this is no slight against our president. This is to say, he says incendiary things. He would agree with that, right? But when he says those incendiary things, it tends to drive up the ante on the emotional valence, the power that we kind of that we become accustomed to. The kids eat Takis nowadays, right? My kids eat these Takis. They put your mouth on fire and they're horrible. And these are Sour Patch Kids. They have this higher tolerance than we did for these extremes. And I think because our president tends to use extreme discourses, because he attracts people of extreme discourses, and he has, and I want to accentuate this, he has publicly denounced white supremacy. However, white supremacists love Donald Trump, and they continue to laud him, respect him, celebrate him in the public, and that continues to polarize us politically. But because they're white supremacists, it also polarizes us racially. And so you have a lot of people who have some angst and some anger and hatred and fear, and they are able to peg it to their whiteness or their blackness or their Jewishness or whatever it is that they think is their identity, and that causes us to drive ourselves apart. Remember these wedges? These wedges that drive us apart? Right now, we have three pandemics. We have the health one, we have the economic one, because we have these high rates of unemployment and poverty, and then we have this racial thing that's been happening. That's kind of been a whirlwind around George Floyd and Derek Chauvin. The fact that Derek Chauvin's white body performed a lynching in the street of George Floyd's black body was a moment that we could all lock in, repeat, and then we could attach it to whatever we wanted to attach it to in terms of our own talking points, our own fears, our own concerns, and then, of course, the media's portrayal of our polarization. Someone told me recently, we're more polarized than we've ever been before. I said, really? How about the Civil War? We're not more polarized than we've ever been before, y'all. We're not. It's portrayed that way, and there's potential for it to slide off the edge or to come back to the center. But one thing I loved about the protests that I'm seeing out there, I'm seeing a lot of diversity. I'm seeing people of a lot of different backgrounds coming together saying, no more. We want to do better. We want to learn more. I love that. People are getting reading lists and learning more.
Right. Yeah. So I want to move us to some teacher talk, because I know we have so many teachers saying this is so interesting, this is so engaging, but we're adults. I'm teaching 13-year-olds, I'm teaching 17-year-olds. How in the world do I get into this stuff with them in my very rural county or my very urban classroom? So I'm going to invite two panelists to come and join us as well. We'll take some, let Sonny catch his breath a little bit and get him some support. I'm going to invite Miss Latanya Smith-Hinton and Mr. Matt Sheldon to join us. Miss Hinton is a school administrator in Durham Public Schools. Prior to going to the dark side, I mean administration, Miss Hinton taught 7th and 8th grade social studies and maintains her teaching license in social studies. So she is a teacher at heart. She's a member of Delta Sigma Theta and is dedicated to supporting social justice, equity, and anti-racism work in the classroom. Throughout her 20 years in education, she's constantly inspired by she says, the innovative ways that she sees teachers, specifically social studies and history teachers, engage students with the always connected stories of our past and present. Welcome, Ms. Hinton. And Mr. Sheldon is an English teacher in Wake County Public Schools. After participating in multi-school collaboration with the Equal Justice Initiative to conduct a truth and reconciliation campaign focused on a 100-year-old lynching in Wake County. Matt and his students were given the green light to develop a course that makes the study of hard history and community engagement its central goal. And this will likely go district-wide. Last spring, Matt and his students studied everything from Wilmington 1898 to the North Carolina eugenics program and the lasting impact of removal on the indigenous community in our state. So we are happy to be joined by these boots on the ground. We're all teachers. I've been out of the classroom a few years though, so I feel like I'm losing my street cred. So we need some folks still in the trenches with us. And what I want to start by talking about first, I love, Stephanie from Halifax County pointed out, these are critical conversations, but they're difficult to navigate. So I just want us all to take a breath and acknowledge the fact that this is hard work to do with adolescents, with any age for that matter, especially in today's world. So let's definitely acknowledge that. Nobody, and I'm going to tell you all, if you're disappointed and you want to drop off the webinar right now, we do not have any magic beans to give out. We do not have a magic wand. I know. Look, we just went down to like 10 participants. But there are some things that we can talk about and some tips we can offer. Jeannie from Wake so smartly said, teaching right now, it's like navigating a political landmine, which I think all of us as educators feel that at all levels. So, all of so many questions coming in and that folks submitted were so much about classroom environment. So I want to put a few to you all kind of together because several of these are very similar. Joshua from Pamlico asks, how do I create an environment for these types of teachable moments? Rebecca wants to know how to set up a positive learning environment for these potentially charged discussions. I feel like everything is charged these days. Virginia wants to know, she says she's really challenged by making sure she gets it right, that she's created a climate in which students feel prepared and comfortable to discuss these topics. And let me just say before I turn that over to you, I think I appreciate teachers for recognizing that, because the fact is you cannot do this work and have these conversations without cultivating a type of classroom to be able to do it successfully. This is not something on day one you can write racism across the board and just jump into it, right? You've got to prepare. Failing to prepare is preparing to fail, right? So for you all, what are some thoughts you have on the best ways to make sure you create that environment for success in this work?
Okay, I'll go ahead and start. Thank you so much for having me this evening. Sonny, you are amazing as always. Always amazing. I would say as a teacher first, that's my core. The most important thing about a classroom is building it. Mm-hmm. All like a field of dreams, right? If you build it, they will come. If you build and nurture that environment, they will come to it. You have to create a safe space for them. So how do you do that? One of the things that I would always do in my classroom is we came in with community expectations. Here are the things that we are going to agree to in this classroom. One of them being everyone has a right to their own opinion. We understand that. The other thing that we always did was we created a social contract among ourselves. So every class has their own social contract. How do we want to treat each other? How do you want your teacher to treat you? And how do we treat each other when conflicts happen? Mm-hmm. It's going to happen, right? And so when we're having these conversations, we're going to have disagreements. So we want to make sure that we're still being respectful in that space. And so once you create that environment, you begin to suggest different topics. I love Socratic seminars. It allows students to have their voice in a classroom. Teachers, we have to back up and stop doing so much teacher talk. We have to create a space where we are the facilitators and students are actually helping us with the instruction.
Yes.
They have opinions, they have thoughts, and we want to make sure that they are heard in the classroom. And so when you create that safe space and have those foundational things there, respect and listening, then you can create a space where you can have those hard conversations.
That's so true. And I know one of the things I've heard you speak about before is how your students participate in that. So it's not you saying, here are the rules on the wall. They bring that. And so everybody buys into it with that. And I agree. Socratic seminars, I always used to joke that that was the best lesson I didn't have to teach, because if you plan the good questions, your students will go for it. Yeah. What about you, Matt? What do you think?
I think the key term for me is intentionality. I can't give you the magic icebreaker or the activity that builds a community in a classroom, because it has to be authentic to you, to the individual teacher. And kids will sniff out inauthenticity very quickly, and then it's dead. Then your efforts are already done at that point. So it's got to be authentically you. But I think if we make it intentional, and that's going to be so much harder now in the virtual world. I think to myself, all those little moments of a kid coming in the door, and I just have that quick back and forth with that kid as they come in. I'm not going to have that anymore. Or will I? Will I just have to create a new way to have those moments? So I think intentionality is really the key. And also, I think everybody opening up and sharing a little bit about themselves and their background, and letting people know where they're coming from. I think if we understand that we're all coming from or we should be coming from a place of love, it's going to forgive some of those stumbling points and those errors. Christy, and some of the questions that you mentioned, that last question about being so worried about, saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. To me, the worst case scenario would be frozen into inaction. You're so worried about potentially saying the wrong thing or upsetting somebody. Apologies can always be made. Fences can always be mended. Right. But if somebody just steps back and lets something terrible happen in their room, lets an atmosphere that doesn't feel safe start to blossom in their room, then you're complicit in that. So, I would rather have to go back and fix a relationship, and I've had to do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, intentionality, that's my key word. You got to find what's authentic to you as a teacher, and then make it a point of building those relationships, and now more than ever in the virtual world.
I think that's such a good point. And I want to let Sonny talk a little bit, because I know, Sonny, you talk so much about the importance of relationships. But Matt, what you said, I think it's so critical. A lot of times as teachers, we forget that you're gonna make mistakes, right? You are gonna have moments, and you're gonna mess up. I'm just gonna let everybody know. Matt and Latanya are amazing, and they've messed up. I've messed up. And so the key is to acknowledge, apologize, right? If your intention is there and you say, this is why I want to get into this, and then you go back and say, this happened and I'm sorry, that's a super powerful moment for a class, because they hear that so little. It's also okay to say as a teacher, I don't know. And we forget that, I think. And so I think that's so key. And I think it's also wrapped up with the relationship that you have with your students. Sonny, will you talk a little bit about that? Because I know you say that that's key. It's the relationships that are everything.
It certainly is. And I think the fact that I love poetry and I love Shakespeare remind me that rhythms are so important. It's the rhythms of our lives. Like Matt said earlier, it's so much harder to develop these relationships and establish them, maintain them in the virtual world, because we can't keep those rhythms. You show up in my classroom every day at 8. We do this thing. This is our routine, right? We have, as Latanya said, we have our ground rules. Well, what we've got to do is we've got to set up these rhythms for ourselves. A friend of mine told me a while ago, he said, Sonny, just know this: simple, repeatable, consistent rhythms build up in any child a sense of significance. Because that child walks into that space, the classroom or the virtual classroom, and they see certain rhythms and they realize, oh, this has been set up for me. And they just instantly know I matter. This is set up so that, and right, so rhythms are how we go. I tell these people when I start a class or a session, I say, somebody tell me the 5th letter of the alphabet quick. And I see people going, A, B, C, D, E. Right, you had to sing the song, right? As little kids, we understand, we respect rhythm. We learn by songs. And then we get to the point of like middle school and we're like, no, just memorize it. Just learn it. The way we learn material and the way we learn each other is always through rhythms. It's why Shakespeare wrote Iambic pentameter. To be or not to be, that is the question. It's the heartbeat. It's our human connection. whether it's the drums, and all of us, we talk about Black people having rhythms, but every person that I know that comes from any tribal background, which is all of us, there's some kind of percussive instrument that reminds us of our beat, our flow of blood and connection, right? So I think that that's important. So what I've been doing is I start off by saying, I do something called I Hear You. So I just look at everybody on the square and I say, okay, we're gonna start off this session by just saying your name and what your name means. I love doing that to learn more about you, but then also tell us how you're feeling today. But tell us and show us. I want you to use your body because your mind and your body matter. We can't be together physically right now, but we can still express. So we go around the circle and you say, today I feel sleepy. And then all the rest of us would say, I hear you. And when we say, I hear you, we're affirming you, but we're also trying to put your feelings and thoughts into our bodies because we can't touch or share energy physically. We can still honor you with our eyes and our ears by hearing you and paying attention to you and trying to show you, yeah, we're here with you. We may not agree, we may not understand, but we're going to be here with you. So that rhythm is something that works really well with me in terms of conveying that intention that Matt talked about, but also kind of setting up a space where we can move quickly from safety to courage. I love safe spaces for kids to let them know, okay, you're wonderful, we're glad you're here, you're a blessing. But we want to quickly move to courage. I want you to get to a courageous place where you're willing to take a chance and say something because you believe in it. And somebody may disagree, but we're going to respect each other here and work through it.
Yeah. So let's move into this. I didn't just pick the easy questions for you guys. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is, for the love of God, we're all going to be doing a lot of teaching on the Zooming and the Googling this coming semester, if not longer. So we have many questions. Denise from Scotland: how do you begin the race discussion in a virtual classroom filled with new students who I haven't even met in person yet? You know, another teacher notes that, you know, in person I feel okay, but online is a whole different thing. You know, if I can't, and I know, Sonny, you talk about this, it's so important to be able to see faces and read reactions. Jerry from Buncombe says, you know, what are the roles of a teacher, especially amidst a pandemic? How in the world do we do this in a virtual setting? What are some, you know, tips and tricks? And I know, Sonny, you have a few up your sleeve that I think work well in person or virtually. So I'm going to pull those up if you want to
I'll look at those real quick and then
let us bask in your knowledge.
Listen, this is just like I've been cutting my teeth over the last few months. I'm like having to figure out how to do workshops virtually. It's all on space, and I picked it up and polished it.
Right.
So I will tell you this. One thing I do not do is start with the issue. I always start with the people. And I think that, that Matt and LaTanya have already clarified that. Like, let's set up our ground rules together. And I also say, hey, look, this is how we're going to treat each other. So we can set up ground rules, but the three ground rules that I'm going to set up are respect, no doubt, and speak for yourself. Rhythm is important, right? One thing I can do is call and response. So I'll say, everybody take yourselves off mute. And I'm going to say, I say, R-E-S-P-E-C-T. Take yourself on mute. Come on. Well, how would you finish that? R-E-S-P-E-C-T.
Find out what it means to me.
Right, and we all love to sing and dance. We know we're horrible. Some of us are, like me. But it's like that moment, all of a sudden we were vulnerable. We're laughing, we're blushing, but we're safe. And we're together, right? So we just did a rhythm. We did a call and response. I just developed some connective tissue between us. And I heard these different voices, and I might say, oh, your voice is so much better than mine. So now we're celebrating the diversity in the room, right? Okay, what does respect mean? Respect means I want you to respect yourself enough to share your thoughts. Even if you don't think it's consequential or you think that people won't agree with it, I respect you. As a teacher, I need to hear you because I'm learning from you as well, and my students are all learning from you. So you are an expert in your own life experience, even though you haven't cracked the textbook open yet. So I'm going to ask you to respect yourself enough to share today. Raise your hand, ask a question, even if it's anonymous. Your input matters. It makes us better. And I always have these little terms. We are better together. So by the end of the class, I might say, we're better, what? Oh, he's so corny, together, right? And I get the, oh, you got the dad jokes, whatever, but you love me because I love you first. It's great. So with that said, and I also want you to know you respect each other. That is, you're going to hear things in this room. I said it, you're going to hear things in this room that will offend you, bother you, maybe even trigger you, but we're family. Family stays in the room, and we still respect other people's right to share their opinion, right? And we're going to figure this thing out together. Everybody say, no doubt.
No doubt.
No doubt.
I like that. No doubt.
No doubt.
That's it. That reminds us to give each other the benefit of the doubt. We're family in here, and 9 times out of 10, nobody means to offend anybody in this room. So let's give each other the benefit of the doubt. When someone says something that you disagree with, or you just think it's ignorant or wrong or ill or whatever term you want to use, remember, we do better when we know better. Maybe they don't know your perspective yet. Again, your expert knowledge is important here. So let's give each other the benefit of the doubt that we're probably not intentionally offending each other. Some people may, and we'll address that behavior when we have to. But more often than not, it's so much better to just listen and to take each other in and to bring counterpoints as opposed to jumping down each other's throats. That brings us to our third point. When you hear something you disagree with or that you don't like or it triggers you, instead of just running away or closing off, because we still need you here, I want you to raise your hand and share a counterpoint. Somebody look at somebody, find a picture and say, speak for yourself.
Speak for yourself.
No.
Oh, Latanya, you looking at me? She was looking, man, why are you calling me out? Anyway, we'll talk about that later. So speak for yourself. When you do raise your hand and say, nah, I disagree, speak from your own experience. Let's stay away from absolutes, stereotypes, all girls, all guys, all. That shuts down conversation. So let's make sure we speak from our own experience. Well, I hear what you're saying, but in my experience, this happened to me. And you own that because you're an expert in that. If we can do those three things, we can have some great conversation and we will step on each other's toes. And guess what we're going to do? We're going to fail forward. We're going to get better and stronger along the way because I'm not worried about us being politically correct. I want us to be personally connected. You matter to me, and I hope and pray I matter to you. And if I do, you will have no problem respecting me, give me the benefit of the doubt, and speaking for yourself. And I promise y'all, I'll do the same for you. And I'll challenge you. If I ever break these rules, call me out because I'm here to learn with you as well.
I love that. And what I love about this, it's short, it's simple, it works really great for an online format, but this needs to happen in the beginning, this introduction that you're talking about. Just hearing you say it to me, I get a sense of who you are as a teacher. You're not going to shame me. You're not going to judge me. You're going to keep me safe. Just with those 3 simple bullets and the 5 minutes you just took to talk about it. So I think that's really important. I know you also have some really great, very simple strategies for discussion online or in person.
Yes, great questions about how do we address these topics. And I think that Matt and Latanya, again, set up beautifully. We address the kids first. We build relationship with them, express intention in the ground rules first and foremost. They got to know that it's safe and that you care. Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. Now, once I got your heart and your mind, and I love you and there's nothing you can do to make me stop loving you, oh, here we go. Now, I can bring up any kind of topic I want because we need to address it. And I'm not bringing it up with my talking points. I'm not bringing it up with any kind of preconceived notion of what you should conclude outside of knowing the facts and the history. Now, we got to test on some stuff. We got EOGs, right? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put something crazy on the table. I try not to use these terms crazy because mental illness is a serious thing. Something just outlandish on the table. See, that's something that my students have taught me, right? So y'all are teaching me stuff. Always those side notes, they love that because it reminds them they're important. So I'll say something like, okay, Crispus Attucks, 1770, connected to Ahmad Arbury. Okay, and then I'll perform what I just performed. I'll say, okay, now, y'all may agree, disagree, there's a connection. You have different connections. Let's go through Bloom's taxonomy of understanding, memorizing, analyzing, getting to creating. But the first thing I want to do is I just want to ask you, what did you see there? When I just performed that, what did you see? And they'll have all these things. I saw, just basic stuff, right? I saw a black man. I saw this. I saw that, just on the surface level. And that gives us a chance to just kind of brainstorm and share. I think Brene Brown calls it the silly first draft. She used another S word than draft, right? Just, what did we see? Now let's dig deeper. Okay, we saw these things. We saw this image of a black man. We saw John Adams calling mulatto. We saw the bacon, all these different things. Okay, cool. What do you think is happening here? And they're going to be all different kinds of things. I'm going to have Native American students in my class who would say, I don't feel like I was even representing that story. I'm like, I thank you for that. That's a great point. And I skewed this and focused on the black experience because it's really my experience. But I think that all these experiences should be talked about. So you're helping us to see what's happening from your perspective. At that time, there were this tribe and that tribe. Thank you. Let's put that on the board. Now we're getting a bigger picture of the truth that's happening. Now, how does this affect our lives? Looking at it now, I know as a kid, it affected me because I was so proud to be an American and I was so proud to have this piece of Black history that wasn't in February, right, shared. But I'm also a little bit concerned that I see some of the same rhythms of brutalizing Black bodies and trying to use Blackness to weaponize or politicize certain things. And I see some of that today, right? So how this affects my life. Why do we think this is happening? When I say this, not why do we think what Mr. Sonny wants, or Dr. Sonny wants to talk about is important, but why do we think all this stuff that you all put on the table is happening? Let's get to analysis. Let's figure out where this is going. And then how does this empower us? Let's evaluate how this information can be useful to us so we can go out into the world and make it, if not a better place, at least a better informed place. Now, here's the great point. I'm a pragmatist. I don't believe in teaching kids stuff just to take a test. They should always have some understanding of how they can use it in the world. Come on, snap it out with me. And so what will we do? What will we do with this information that we have, this new understanding? I'll be more sensitive to my classmates. I'll better understand this stuff. I will do a deeper dive into history, so I won't just take what my teachers gave me or my parents, whatever the case may be. Let's figure it out together. And we keep we can do this show for anything. It can be for a piece of theater. It can be for a piece of history. It can be for music. Doesn't matter. Just choose an object and then let your experts come to the room like with their lab coats on and do a show on it. And again, it's a rhythm and it's systematic. And they know, okay, every time we do a show, we know, okay, what do I see? See, even if they get attitudinal about it, they know the rhythm. They know how to fit into it, and they know they're an important part of that rhythm.
Right. And what I love about this so much too is it covers some really important things that I think are really important in teaching hard history, especially empowering. We really push teachers when you all cover hard history, controversial current events. It has to be done in a way that empowers students. We can't teach this history in a way that we have to tell the truth, but we also have to do it in an empowering way. We have to talk about the resistance and the agency that have been at play in everything that's happened throughout history. Otherwise, I think students get disempowered and thus disengaged. And so I think having that there as well as the do, that's relevance. You know, why do I need to learn this stuff? Well, here's what you're going to do with it. And I think this is just for teachers, time is our biggest enemy. And this is a nice, quick way to make sure you cover a lot of those really important topics, I think.
I'll just briefly add, do this with yourself first and have some ideas of how you want to fill it in. But for that empower, one empowerment point I would like someone to take from this story of 1770 to 2020 is the fact that Black people and people of different colors were united in a common front back then, whether it's Bacon's Rebellion or the Boston Massacre. We don't have to be this polarized as we're seeing in the media. We can get beyond our differences. I'm empowered. That means, I come from a heritage of people who've worked together in the past, hundreds of years ago. We can do it again.
Fusion politics in North Carolina in the 1800s, right? Yeah, for sure. So I know you've got another quick one here.
Yeah, this one is super quick. This one is, by the way, that last one, Dr. Alex Lightfoot from the Gilling School of Public Health taught me this. She's a public health researcher, and they use this when they're doing something called photo voice, which is another really cool thing. Yeah. You have the kids go and take pictures of the theme, and they present their pictures so they can share their pictures with you, and you can share the screen and show it. And then we do a show for each of their pictures. So what does equity mean to you? What does diversity mean to you? What does history mean to you? What does it mean to be American? What does the Confederacy mean to you? And they can actually show a picture, and then as a class, you do a show based upon that picture. Here's a picture of me with my peepaw, and he's got his Confederate jack on his chest, and I love that man. He's wonderful. I may disagree with some of his politics, but I'm not going to pour him out with the bathwater, for example. Right? How do we humanize people that are different from us? All right. This is from David Camp, C-A-M-P-T, psychologist, I believe, PhD, and he wrote a book called The White Allies Toolkit, and he's got this workbook to help people who are racism deniers, people who just either don't believe racism exists or they believe that it's negligible. It's like the one bad apple. But the crates.
A lot of questions.
We're colorblind. We don't. And so what I found that's helpful for me, and also helpful for a lot of my white friends who are talking to their white friends who just don't think that racism is an issue at all, is that first you reflect upon what they're saying. Just listen, active listening, right? Instead of cringing, oh, bigot, oh, I can't believe you like the Confederate flag. I can't believe you want to keep that statue up. Just listen as to why, right? And so as we listen, we take it in and we stop allowing ourselves to get offended. David Bohm, B-O-H-M, was a physicist. He wrote a book called On Dialogue. Really opened my mind to having these conversations. He talked about suspending your own sense of shame or anger or self-righteousness or whatever it may be when you're listening to someone else, because it's not about you. Just hear their story. Like, stop attaching the labels to it. Stop countering it with all of your talking points. Just listen openly. Reflect on what they're saying. Ask questions just to clarify, to make sure you understand. Okay, so you're saying that when you say pride, not prejudice, you mean that it's more about pride than prejudice. Okay, but you acknowledge that there's some prejudice involved. Okay, I just want to make sure. Okay, and not to make an argument, but just to clarify. Right? We got to clarify our terms. There's certain terms I don't use anymore, like white privilege. It's real, I get it, but it's a trigger word. To my conservative white friends, when I use that, the conversation stops. So I ask questions. When you say privilege, what do you mean? Or when you say white, what do you mean? Help me to understand, because if we don't know, if we're not using the same terms, we're not having the same conversation. Then here's the part where we start to get to that connective tissue. I connect. I have a grandfather who has said some things I disagree with before as well. And I love him. I think he's great. I actually have great-great-great-grandfathers who are Confederates, and they're part of who I am, and I'm learning to love myself regardless. I am, as one wonderful writer said, I am a living Confederate monument. I am my Black grandmothers and my Confederate grandfathers. Like it or not, it is what it is, right? So connecting our stories, not to be argumentative or to make a point, but to truly connect and say, you know what? Okay, I can see that. I can start to empathize because I have something in common with you there. And then finally expand. This goes back to that whole notion of speak from your own experiences. You know what? Now that we've gone through this, I have a better understanding of you. Thank you for sharing your expert knowledge on yourself and your history. Can I add to that I'd like to fit into this? I see how my rhythm kind of flows in this as well. Let's do a little jazz here. And let's just kind of open our hearts and minds to each other as we talk about this stuff. So I have a friend who's very conservative. We've gone through this process. And my final kind of expansion is, let's agree that the Civil War was fought about states' rights. Slavery was not the only issue on the table. I used to gag when I said that. I can say that. And, not but, never but. But says everything I just said, erase it. And let's also agree that if slavery were not on the table, I don't think people would have fought brother against brother and killed hundreds of thousands of people. Slavery was a big issue. We're talking like 75 cents of every dollar coming from slave labor. Can we just agree to the fact that it wasn't the only issue? I'll give you the price of rum and all that was important. But people would not have killed each other over the states' rights outside of slavery. And we kind of go from there, not to win an argument, but just kind of at least see that there's some gray areas and we work from there. So race has been very helpful to me with these kind of things that can become incendiary, but don't need to be. They keep the spark, keep your wood, keep it in the fire, keep hot and passionate, but let's not burn each other up.
Right. So I want to move into something that, a couple of things here. That I know is weighing on so many teachers. Like, I think it's probably one of the biggest issues that came up in the pre-questions that were submitted. And let me just say, we won't get to all of your questions. Those of you who are writing a question in the chat box, we see it. And it only shows to everybody if we answer it in writing. So we see the questions, so you can keep them coming. And what we don't get to here, like I said, this is a marathon and not a sprint. So we'll circle back with you. You can join us for future events, and then you can also get in contact with us after this. So know that we're all here together. But the issue of partisanship and this idea that when you are teaching hard history, it is a partisan issue. So I just want to share, this is just 5 of probably the 50 challenges that folks talked about. Everything from, I worry about being accused of giving my students liberal ideas. Parents complain that we are indoctrinating kids. I'm grappling with the concept that for many, hard history equals partisanship. It's challenging that students, parents, and others see it as radical or left. I want to make sure they don't see that. How do you discuss indefensible acts with students without your own personal political bent? How do I be objective, keep everything politically correct so I don't get in trouble? So this theme came up over and over and over again, and I would love to hear what you guys think about that. A lot of worry about pushback from parents, pushback from students, and also pushback from administrators. So I want to bring in, Matt and LaTanya come back too. Let's let Sonny catch his breath and drink some water. What do you guys think? Ms. Hinton, as an administrator, now you're a pretty cool administrator because you're a former history teacher and you get the importance of this. I think a lot of this is obviously preparation, and as Matt said, intention, being clear with that preparation and intention, having that conversation with your administrator, showing how it connects to the standards and things like that. But what do you think about this? What can teachers do to navigate this?
I mean, it is definitely a tough one. It's a dilemma and can be a dilemma, right? I'll start with, as a teacher in the classroom, I remember teaching some challenging topics and hard conversations. And I remember making sure that I connected with my principal to let him know what we were doing in the classroom. And I also invited him in to be a part of the conversation. I created great conversations and relationships with my parents to let them know this is what we're going to learn this year. So we were able to maneuver and navigate that because of the environment that we created.
Goes back to
It was I don't know all the answers. Your students are going to participate in this. I remember another lesson specifically, we went to the Akron Museum and the SAR exhibit was there, and we saw a piece of art hanging. It was Strange Fruit. Connected that with Billie Holiday's song and lyrics. So we included, this art, this song, and we had hard conversation about lynching, right? And so, but making sure that we were upfront and honest about the conversation. And again, I'm facilitating. The students are engaged in the conversation. So on the flip side of that, as an administrator, it is and can be very challenging to maneuver. But what I will recommend is making sure that you have or encourage having an equity social justice team.
At the school level.
Parents should be a part of it. Students should be a part of it. Staff should be a part of it. Community members should be a part of it. What do we want our community to look like? We want our students to leave our space into either high school or into college, military, or work life. This is our responsibility when they're with us.
Yeah.
So when you have that and having all these conversations at the table, then you can move forward together. And yes, it is hard. You have to push through hard. And it's uncomfortable, but you have to push forward. And so I just want to encourage teachers, it's okay. You don't have all the answers.
That's right.
No one does. And it's okay, but you have to have the conversation.
That is such a brilliant idea, just to have a school-based committee, so that, as you do this work, the committee knows you're on board. And then if there is a challenge, you have this committee to kind of back you up, to reference, to legitimize the work. North Carolina is covered in great universities and community colleges. Reach out to these folks and get that extra kind of seal of support and approval. I think that's really, really smart. Matt, what do you think?
I have to +1 everything that LaTanya just said. I'm very, very lucky that in Wake County, we have a district level equity team at my school.
You're amazing.
They're fantastic. At my building, we have an equity team that is both our teachers and an equity team for our students. And then that way, when I start these conversations, I don't feel so alone and that I'm not out there. You want to talk about +1 on the principal side of things. My principal came with us when we went down to Montgomery to visit the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. And we went to Dexter Ave Baptist Church, and we went to the Freedom Rides Museum. And, my principal said to me before the trip, he was like, he asked permission to come. And he was like, I don't want to come if it's going to change the mood. And I said, no, you should come because the kids should see you processing this. And it completely changed his relationship with our student body from that moment forward. So getting your administration in there, getting the community in. In my class, we do a thing called Friday Family Breakfast. We try to look at 7:25 class time as a potential plus and not a negative. And, my Italian background speaks to the power of breaking bread with people. And that's how you build that connective tissue that Dr. Kelly was talking about. And we brought in folks from our local chapter of the NAACP, community organizers, folks from the Apex Mayor's office. I mean, when your family and your students see that it's not just you standing up there, the lone voice, that you've got a squad behind you, that it gives a lot of validity to what you say. And to circle back to something Dr. Kelly was saying before with showed, that landing on the do, I think that's really important. That I think things become issues with parents and administrators when the sole purpose of what you're doing in the room is to talk about all these incredibly traumatic things from our nation and our state's history. And then you say, all right, guys, 7,600 North Carolinians were sterilized. Have a good time in math class.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I would be in fact traumatizing my students if that's what I did, and they would take that story home, and then a parent's going to have a problem, and then an administrator is going to have a problem. But instead, everything that I do with my students, I'm pointing them in a direction to what are you going to do with this, and what positive community engagement activity can you do, so they take all that emotion. And it's okay that they have emotion. It's okay that they get sad and they get angry and they get frustrated. It's okay, as long as you help them process it, and then you point it in a direction, and it becomes the fuel for something that they actually do. And I've seen that it doesn't end up backfiring. I don't get the complaints from the parents and the administrators, because the kids aren't upset. They feel powerful. They feel like they can go out and do something with that information, as opposed to me just imposing that information on them. That's the kind of thing that stirs people up. So
I love that. You know, it reminds me of Dr. Hassan Jeffries' quote that hard history isn't hopeless history. We must give our students a sense of hope. And that's not to say we're going to sugarcoat it all, but we're going to teach it in a way that we show, again, the resistance, the agency, the pushback, and then how we must continue that agency and pushback. I think that's really important. And just so everybody knows, one of the things that we're going to follow up with you with is Carolina K-12 has a guide, kind of tips and tricks for doing this work, everything from how to prepare your parents. You know your own environment. And if you know you've got parents, you know your parents, Matt can get by with stuff that somebody may be teaching in Jackson County can't. And so you know your community, you know how much you need to protect yourself. It might be a letter that goes out, it might be a permission slip. It's going to differ based on every single classroom, but we're going to send you a document to kind of give you some guidance on some things, because you do want to do this work safely. That said, I do want to share this because so many of you talked about this worry about being neutral, this worry about not showing any bias whatsoever. And so I wanted to share a couple of things with you. I'm going to send this article in your post packet so that you can read it. But this is an article talking about, you know, there is no such thing as neutrality in the classroom. That neutrality is itself a political choice, and it's one that bolsters the status quo. It results in a classroom that potentially ignores the fears, the interests, and the concerns of many students. So I want you guys as teachers to think about that. And I think it connects back to what I said early on, this deprofessionalization of the teaching profession, you know, that reminder that you are experts and scholars. So just really quick, this excerpt I think is really interesting. Dr. Dunn at the School of Education in Michigan State believes that a strict adherence to neutrality and avoiding political topics is a tactic that can actually marginalize many students. Now, we're not talking about getting up front and saying, everybody vote for Donald Trump, everybody vote for Joe Biden. We're not talking about that. That, of course, is unacceptable. But the kind of neutrality when you don't want to discuss controversial issues like race, like inequity, like climate change, gun violence, out of fear of being labeled partisan, that's a real problem. And I think, honestly, it's how we get to the place we are, that we are in 2020, when we are not learning to talk about these issues in a classroom. You cannot expect anymore that folks are going to learn to talk about this around the dinner table, because that's a whole other thing if the dinner table even exists anymore. Dr. Dunn says education is at its core inherently political. Everything in education, and we've seen so much of this lately in so many articles, everything from the textbooks to the curriculum to the policies that govern our work as teachers and our students' learning, it's all political, it's all ideologically informed, and what is taught and how it is taught is shaped by cultural, social, political, and historic contexts in which a school is situated. We can't pretend that we can leave these contexts at the door. So it's something to think about. Like I said, I'm not sending everybody off to go and be radicals and get fired, but I do think we need to think about this constant push of don't indoctrinate, you know, be neutral in the classroom. Neutrality is itself saying stay away from this, and that itself is pushing a political agenda on the classroom. I'll also send you this article. It's a really great article from Dr. Emmett at Columbia University, who talks about what's called reality pedagogy. and viewing students as co-teachers. And Sonny has talked so much about this already in some of the examples he's given. Reality pedagogy interrupts the notion that teaching is about managing students and behavior. We must see our students as co-teachers, create a space for dialogue, learn how they're experiencing the classroom and the world beyond it. It's a space for connection, but also critiques they have of my teaching, he says. So think about that, being open to your students saying to you, and when you do this, they'll often have a lot of respect for you and don't always tear you down like you might think that they would, because they have skin in the game at that point. They realize that that their opinion matters. Co-teaching requires that teachers be humble enough to become students of their students. That takes the pressure off of you of feeling like you have to know everything, which you cannot possibly know everything. And it's especially beneficial for students who have been marginalized or harmed. Teachers can learn the most from them. And what's interesting is Dr. Edmond was teaching in New York City after 9/11. And because of this push, good God, don't bring in issues of Islam or terrorism in your class right now. But he looks back and feels, you know, he never asked to hear a student's thoughts about sitting and learning while literally the world around them was going crazy and falling down. He didn't make space, he says, for my Muslim students to heal from being targeted. But if I had started that dialogue, I would have learned a lot from them about how I could have been a better teacher. And so, you know, I think that's really something important to think about in terms of the harm that can come from not bringing these issues into the classroom and really kind of standing up against that pressure to keep your classroom so sanitized that you can't get into anything real. I think it's really important to just kind of keep that in your mind. The last thing I kind of want to come to, and I love that there's so much we won't get to come to, but I love this question that comes from Paris Miller, and we've touched on this a little bit, but she asks, what are strategies for teaching hard history in ways that empower Black students rather than victimize them? This question is everything. This question is what we're talking about when we say hard history is not hopeless history. But I'd love to hear a little bit from all of you about this. Hannah from Wake echoes this. She says, balancing teaching the agency and the victories with the structural oppression in such a way, again, that students are empowered. Linda from Orange said, you know, I want to be able to present information to students that in a way that doesn't encourage a sense of hopelessness. We had a teacher who was speaking as a parent who has a biracial child, and she said, how do I teach this so that he doesn't have shame for the white side of his family? And Sonny, I know you talk a lot about the importance of not shaming. I've heard you say so eloquently, you want to call people in rather than call them out. So I'd love just to hear your thoughts on that theme. How do we do that? And brilliant on all of you to recognize how important that is.
I'll just say briefly, someone said in one of the comments that we need to understand we're all from the human race. And I found through my art and explaining that haunted family tree is my way of saying, you're right, we're all from the human race. And the tree's haunted. It's got all kinds of stuff in it that we just need to acknowledge. But I'm very much about owning our collective history in the same way that we own our connection to our family members and our family. My parents were not the best parents in the world, but I love them and I would die for them, right? I'm not the best parent in the world. I didn't give the best talk to my son, but you know I love him and I know he loves me. The point is, at what point do we get to this place in this country where we can't acknowledge that we have some stuff that we got to deal with, that we have some issues? I got issues. I would say to somebody, I got issues. I sing that little song. It's kind of old now, but you know, I would sing that and the kids would start laughing. Oh, he knows some of our music. I'm like, that's all I know. But like, I got issues. I would hate to be known for the worst thing I've ever done. Has Dr. Kelly done some bad things in this world, some detestable things? Yeah, I'm pretty ashamed about those things. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll have students write down the best thing. I'll do a haiku. Do a haiku on the best thing you've ever done, the thing you're most proud of. Cool. Now I want you to do a haiku on the worst thing you've ever done, the thing you're least proud of. The room gets quiet. And then I'll say, I want you to tear up that second one. That's between you and your creator. You know it exists, but guess what? I want to know you for that. I want you to share that. Don't get me wrong, that's still real. It exists. We're going to acknowledge it. And if you want to share your haiku, you can. But I'm not going to make you dwell on it. Just acknowledge it. right? And so I think for me, finding places to connect and be collective and acknowledge the fact that none of us is perfect and we're still going to deal with each other. We got to stop cancel culture. I don't like gotcha culture. I don't like, because it stops conversation.
Right. Right. What about you, Matt and LaTanya? Thoughts on how to make sure students are empowered?
I would say, number one, I tell my kids that I'm not empowering them, because that implies that I have power that I'm giving to them. And I say, you are powerful. All I'm doing is aiming you in a direction and facilitating your use of your own power that you already have. And then from there, like kind of going back to what I was saying before, that you have to then, whatever you're discussing and studying in your class, you got to point it in a direction that they do something with it. Because just talking about some of these issues is traumatizing. And also, you know, it's easy to focus on victimization. There's a lot of history where you can look towards victimization, but I want to be very intentional about putting forward people and studying events that show pushback. I want to teach about Robert F. Williams and his wife Mabel, and taking no nonsense down in Union County and backing up the KKK. You know, I want to talk about the native tribes in North Carolina that pushed back against the KKK, with the Lumbee tribe with the Battle of Maxton Creek. You know, you want to talk about the Cherokee chief that refused to leave. You know, so there's stories there that aren't just purely of victimization, that show resistance and show success. So those stories need to be taught as well. But I think ultimately it comes back to, they've got to go and do something with the information.
And I love, Matt, what you're saying, and Valencia has pointed out as well, that is very important. We all have to be aware of our race as the teacher, and the race of our students, and the community that you are in, because that can, you know, I think we've been taught that colorblind is the way to be. Obviously, that's not the way to be, because, you know, we see time and time again, some systems show, unfortunately, race very much is a part of it. And so we have a lot of questions about that. And I think it's really great that teachers are starting to think about that. You know, if I am a white woman teaching predominantly white children, I might come at it in one way. Whereas if I'm a white man teaching predominantly African-American children, I might come at it in a very different way. So I think it's very important, like you were saying earlier, Matt, so well, every single classroom is going to be different. So there's not, you know, a one-stop shop for this work, because it's very specific to your environment. You know, if you are in Asheboro, Randolph County, that is a very different place than Chapel Hill in Orange County, right? We have to acknowledge that and work with where we are and how we can. Ms. Hinton, did you have any thoughts?
I would just say educators have to do the work. When I say that, I mean, we have to find the hope. Like Matt said, the victimization is very easy to find and feel in different history stories along the way, but we have to do the work in actually finding the hope in those stories. The other thing I would say is making sure that we teach students to question.
Yes, everything.
Whose story isn't being told. And like how my perspective on history is, as we journey, it's a journey. As we journey through history, we need to hear what they heard, see what they saw, and feel what they felt as we journey through history. And so as we begin to teach students to question documents, to question what they heard, then they will be able to see the hope and not be hopeless as well.
Thank you. I'm going to say goodbye to Ms. Hinton and Mr. Matt Sheldon for now. Thank you both so much for joining us. This is a small example of the amazing public school teachers in this state and around this nation, as are all of you with us. So thank you both. And I want to let Sonny just say a final word to us here. Before I do, I found this quote recently from the amazing civil rights icon from North Carolina, Pauli Murray. And I think these words are really relevant to what we're talking about. She said, "It has taken me a lifetime to discover that true emancipation lies in the acceptance of the whole past, in deriving strength from all my roots, in facing up to the degradation as well as the dignity of my ancestors." And while Polly Murray was an African-American female, I actually think this applies to white folks and Black folks, that we take it all and face up to it. We have to face it to fix it. We have to face it to move forward, rather than shame, rather than be beat down by it, that we have to rise up and face it. And so I wanted to now just let Sonny say a few closing words to us. Dr. Kelly, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate you. We appreciate your performance, especially us teachers. We can't handle it when somebody reads a paper to us, Sonny. Like, we just lose our minds. So we thank you for engaging us.
Pleasure. My pleasure. I'm sorry I didn't have all the PowerPoint slides I wanted to have. I wanted to have 50 PowerPoint slides.
No, we're good. No, we're good without the PowerPoint.
No, listen, y'all, if I said this was going to be easy, then I would be lying. If I said you were not going to be uncomfortable, then I would be lying. I especially want to give a shout out, a word of affirmation for those two teachers who are white, who are teaching students of color in this very harrowing age to teach, if you're any race, but especially as a white person who may be accused sight unseen for being a bigot, right? The same concern I have for my son in the talk, that he might be seen as a criminal or as a thug or as someone who's not smart. I know that many of my white friends have, that they may be seen as a bigot or as racist or as out of line or a picture of the patriarchy or colonial, all those kind of things just by showing up. Our skin performs something. So we do ourselves and each other a disservice when we say that we're colorblind. We have to see color enough to appreciate it.
That's right.
And when we see color itself, what we call race. Somebody brought up a good point. You know, race is illogical. It's not even a real thing, right? We're really talking about phenotype and culture and ethnicity. We tie that all in and we try to harness it down with this term race, which is very slippery, right? But when we see people and we see their differences, their diversity it's a neutral thing. It just is. When we include them, when we ask them, when we learn from them, and we're willing to teach and learn at the same time from our own vantage points, that's when diversity becomes powerful. It turns into inclusion. So I just want to challenge us as we try to grasp for hope and for a way through this, that we always commit ourselves to deliberate discomfort. This human interaction game, this teaching game, it's a contact sport. It's messy. We're going to get messy a lot. And in the midst of that, a lot of people are going to rub off on us. And as my text says, the iron sharpens iron and it makes us better. But I'm learning to embrace deliberate discomfort in this season.
Yes.
I live in a predominantly white neighborhood now, and I was driving to my home and a kind of a beat up pickup truck was coming in the opposite direction from me. A white guy, middle-aged white guy with the ball cap stopped, and he looked at me and I said, "Oh no, what's going to happen?" And he pulled up slowly to my car and he looked me in the eye and said, "How you doing? Beautiful day, isn't it?" I said, "I'm fine. Yeah, it's beautiful. All right, see you around." He just wanted to say hi. I had to realize that even in our discomfort, we've got to be able to contend with fear and realize that it's false evidence appearing real. Sometimes the threat is real, but sometimes it's not. So we've got to give every person that we see a chance. So let's move from being politically correct as much as we can. I know you got to keep your jobs, so do I.
Right.
But let's move from being politically correct and more to being personally connected. So I'm going to give you 3 do's that I give people whenever I finish performing the talk or anything like this. Number 1, I want you to look for people who do not look like, live like, or love like you. And I want you to spend some time with them. And don't talk race, don't talk isms, just talk life. Kids, food, as Matt said, break bread and just connect to them as a human being. You will find that your heart and your mind will grow and expand, and so will theirs, because you are indeed experts in your own respective lives. Next, I want you to find people who do look like, live like, and love like you, and share with them the experiences that you've had as you expanded your perspective with these other folks, and let them know that, hey, they don't bite. It's false evidence appearing real. We actually can get along better. Matter of fact, hundreds of years ago, Bacon's Rebellion, Crispus Attucks, people were standing arm in arm together, right? And then thirdly, I'm going to challenge everyone to invest in your community. You all are already investing in your classrooms, but choose people that you see are marginalized, that are quiet. For me, in my classrooms, it's the heterosexual, cisgender, white male. They shut down in my classrooms because they're trying to be careful. And that breaks my heart as an educator. It breaks my heart as an American, as a human. And so what I do is I grab them right after class. I give them a hug, a high five when I can, or I say hello, and I say, "Hey, I care about what you have to say. And I don't want you to be too careful in this room. I know my body performs something, right? I come from the liberal ivory tower, as they call it. But I come here most importantly for you. So I want to challenge you to speak up and know that I will respect you and I will hear you. So I'm asking us to invest in people who at any given moment seem marginalized or like they don't have a voice or they're not empowered. Empower them and challenge them to get into the fray and to be uncomfortable by putting your own skin in the game and leading by example.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Sonny Kelly. We appreciate you so much. You are the best. We'll make sure everybody has your website to learn how to get more of Sonny in their lives. Sonny is Sonny. He brings the sunshine for real. The last thing I just want to share with everybody is right after this event, we have another event taking place. If you would like to join us, we're going to be hosting Teaching the African Diaspora right after this event tonight. So if you want to jump on really quick and join us for that, then we would welcome. I'll share my screen here in just a second and show you that information. I also want to say a big thank you again to the Breitmeyer Foundation for funding this, for supporting this work, for understanding the importance of this work. Thank you again to LaTanya Smith, to Matt Sheldone, to Sonny Kelly, and to every teacher here with us tonight. We see you, we hear you, we value you, we know how hard your job is. We are here to help you. You literally make our world a better place every single day. Thank you for what you do. We hope you'll all tell your friends about this. Join us tonight. There is the link up front. If you want to hop on, you can still register up until right before 7 o'clock, engaging the African diaspora in K-12 education. It features some great folks, including Dr. Hassan Jeffries, who I quoted tonight, who's a rock star in this work. Our next virtual hard history program will be on Thursday, August 13th, about the amazing Abraham Galloway from North Carolina. You will not be disappointed in that program. If you don't know about his history, you must start teaching it immediately. Thank you, everyone, and we hope to see you next time. Have a great night.